Welcome to this In Conversation with Cherie Blair. I'm Chris Bishop.
And I'm Fifi Peters. Really excited to be having this conversation, of course, about the news of the day, Chris.
Yeah, in the last few hours, a press conference in London put forward new information about allegations of funding terrorism in Botswana that have been the talk of Southern Africa for many months. There is a court case pending in Botswana as we speak, with the next appearance, according to the lawyers, scheduled for November, with the state intelligence agent by the name of Willemina Maswabi, codenamed Butterfly, which has lent its name to the case. Now, her lawyer has confirmed that she is charged with funding terrorism through companies associated with South African businesswoman Bridgette Motsepe and other high-ranking names. A couple of hours ago, a new independent report was launched in London that appears to have poured cold water on some of these allegations. What is likely to happen? Well, on the line from London, we have the lawyer who conducted the report, a lawyer of 45 years standing, Cherie Blair, also the wife of the former British Premier. Just to start off with, Cherie, so I have to ask the question, was there anything in this report at all? Just why do you think it doesn't hold water?
When I was approached and asked would we do an independent forensic examination of this particular affidavit, which is the entirety of the evidence in this case, I mean, obviously, I thought, well, there's going to be issues that are going to be raised that need investigating. And then I read the affidavit, and it's so full of strange errors, ridiculous mistakes, that I started to think, this looks peculiar. And as soon as we started to investigate the matter, everything we looked at, the underlying factual matrix of it just collapsed. I mean, it's quite astonishing. I've never seen such a badly prepared case against somebody, really.
Cherie, could we address the public perception of potential conflict of interest here, given that you're investigating this report on behalf of Ambassador Motsepe, who has also footed the bill for the investigation?
For sure. I mean, the tragedy about this is that rather than the prosecution authorities in Botswana doing their job, they have put together this shambles of an affidavit, have presented it to the court in October 2019, have then essentially conducted the matter through the press and have failed to bring any further evidence before the court, and are now just on Monday asking for even more time to investigate to November 2020. So the tragedy of this is, normally speaking, somebody accused of a crime should usually have a case against them that they could meet. But Ambassador Motsepe has been forced to actually do her own inquiry, because it's the only way to stop these malicious press rumors that have been going around about her role in this matter. And so that's what she did. She put her hand in her own pocket and asked me and our partners in Alico to carry out an independent forensic investigation. And she told us that she just wanted the truth, and we were not to hide or not go anywhere because of whether it may or may not please her. The reality is, and I think if you read the affidavit yourself, it becomes stunningly obvious that this whole thing, as I said in the press conference, is fantastical.
Well, just give us an idea of some of the findings here. I mean, according to the allegations, the Reserve Bank of Botswana has transferred $10 billion, which is a huge amount of money, to a number of companies around the world, some of them associated, according to the allegations, with Bridgette Motsepe. Just give us an idea of what you've come up with in this report that refutes that.
Let's start off with the first one. The $10 billion, by the way, is 55% of the national GDP of Botswana. That's a hell of a lot of money, which apparently disappeared in 2008. In 2008, they say it went into 3 separate accounts. The affidavit then follows just one particular account. The first thing I can say is that the Central Bank of Botswana has stated, have they not, that no such money ever left their account. So that's a bit difficult if you're going to build a case on the alleged siphoning off of funds if no such funds have been siphoned off. But let's take that for a minute and say that's a mistake, that the governor of the Central Bank of Botswana somehow or other inadvertently missed half its GDP going out into these mysterious accounts. Then you trace it to where these accounts were supposed to be going. And when you trace that, the next thing you find is that they're supposed to go to various accounts. When we look into these accounts, some of them don't exist. Those that do exist didn't exist at the time they were supposed to exist. And we have been able to assemble together affidavits for the people who are supposed to be signatories on this account, who give evidence that they've never seen this money, and indeed that many of them were not even operating in 2008 and 2009. And so their names also have been dragged into this. What three of those people told us, however, is that about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, they all had incidents where their accounts were compromised. And so we can only assume that somebody sold the details of their accounts, which are existing accounts, but weren't existing in 2008, but they are existing now, on the dark web, and these true account numbers have been used in order to bolster a case which has no foundation in fact.
Mm. And is the insinuation then, Cherie, that someone from the Botswana government stole some of this data, because it is the data that does appear in the affidavit on which this entire case is based on?
We have no idea how Mr. Hubona, who made the affidavit, came upon these accounts. As I say, some accounts do exist, but they didn't exist at the time. Other accounts don't seem to exist at all. There's an allegation of a bank in Kuala Lumpur, which is a well-known spam bank, which has been used in many frauds in the past. But the really, we don't know. I have no idea where he got the information from. What I do know is that he swore an affidavit that it was true, and yet when we looked into it, it is abundantly clear it is not true.
Why do you think Bridgette Motsepe's name has been connected to all of this?
Well, I have to say, I wish I did know, and I think, again, the people to ask are the people who are making these wrong accusations against her. You will know, of course, that in the end, some of this money ends up in South Africa, and in particular in the accounts of 7 different South African banks, several accounts in some of those banks. And each and every one of the banks in South Africa where that money is alleged to have landed have all confirmed that no such accounts exist, that Bridgette Motsepe is not a signatory to any of those accounts. And on top of that, our own investigations about the Blue Flies and the Fireflies companies, which were alleged to be the recipients of this money, of whom one of the signatories was Bridgette Motsepe, those companies actually don't exist either. And any cursory glance at public documents would have found that they don't exist in South Africa. And we've also done an investigation to see if those accounts exist anywhere in the world, and we have not been able to find any companies with those headings. And the other thing about that, of course, is if this money, considerable millions of dollars, came into South Africa, then for that money to come into South Africa, it has to be authorized by the central bank here. And the central bank here, by here I mean South Africa, has not had any trace of these monies either. And we have a letter to that effect from the South African Central Bank. And, the fact is that if the central bank had allowed these suspicious flows of money in, it wouldn't be doing its job. So the suggestion that it has arrived in South Africa at all is, in fact, an attack on the South African Central Bank and the integrity of the 7 banks, all of whom, of course, as you know, as a business program, have very rigorous duties to ensure that no money for financing terrorism or money laundering, or indeed for any other nefarious purpose, is laundered through the South African banking system. It hasn't been, because it never happened.
And of course, Cherie, it's not only the integrity of the financial institutions and banks in South Africa that has been brought in this case. It's also banks elsewhere in the world, as you did say, from Hong Kong to the US, even the UK. And I do understand that 15 of the 17 banks in which your investigation did look at did confirm no receipt of any forms of money that has been tied to this allegation of money laundering. It's 15 of the 17, but there were 2 outstanding banks that you did say earlier in the press conference hadn't yet come with that information. My question is then, why the decision to publish ahead of receiving information from them?
Well, because we wanted to get this out as soon as possible, and the reality is, once we had the Central Bank of South Africa and the 7 South African banks, and in addition to that, HSBC and International Bank agreeing. The 2 banks that haven't are the Deutsche Bank, but the Deutsche Bank, the recipient of those accounts, who is the Klaus Colling, the gentleman with the aviation company that is mentioned in the report, he has said categorically that though he had an account with the bank, he does have an account. He's one of the people whose details were stolen a few years ago, and that account was not in existence in 2008. And he's got a perfectly innocent business. So we know that if he has presented his accounts and his bank statements, and we can see no such money went in. So to some extent, Deutsche Bank doesn't need to confirm that. And in relation to the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is the other bank, and of course it is, as international banks, they have their own procedures to go through, which can take a long time. In relation to that account too, we have, independent verification that the money isn't there. So there's no need, if you like, to delay. And every day this was going on. Not only were the reputations of the defendant herself, Butterfly, the former head of the Botswana Secret Service, the former president of Botswana, and of course, Bridgette Motsepe herself, but also the attack on the South African banking system. And indeed, even some suggestions that South Africa was not cooperating with this inquiry, which is, again, untrue.
Just one thing I'm struggling with in all of this, Cherie, is that, I worked in Botswana 20 years ago. I helped set up the country's first TV station many years ago. And so I worked with the government system there. And I can tell you something, rigorous is one word I'd use for it. Conservative is another, and I always thought if ever you wanted to try to juke the system, you wouldn't have much luck because of the way it was organized. How can something like this happen then?
Well, as President Khama himself said in the press conference, and you could see the passion in which he said it, he feels this is a terrible tragedy for Botswana, because you're absolutely right. Year after year after year, Transparency International, the World Justice Forum that I'm involved in, who publish rule of law indexes, Botswana has always consistently come at the top of the African countries. Last year, in 2019, it came second only to Rwanda in those indices. And the current president himself, went to the police college to laud the rule of law in Botswana. However, that message is not getting down to the particular people who are handling this prosecution, because in this prosecution case, any prosecutor who has international obligations on the UN guiding principles, their job is not to prosecute regardless. Their job is to do a fair job in accordance to the evidence, to ensure that those who there is a case against are proceeded against, and to ensure that those against whom there is no case are not proceeded against. And in this case, that job has been done either incompetently, and it's interesting that the EU, which recently in May this year, for the first time ever, put Botswana on a list of risky countries in relation to money laundering and anti-terrorism funding, first time ever. They quoted 6 reasons for that, and one of the 6 was the lack of capacity in the prosecution services. And I think at best, this shows whether by underfunding or lack of resources in some other way, if the sort of investigation that led to this prosecution is in fact a good example of what's going on in Botswana, then they aren't capable. But I don't believe that is the case. I still believe the Botswana that you know, the Botswana that has been acknowledged for so many years as a place that really believes in democracy and the rule of law. There are plenty of good, upstanding public servants who do their job properly. But unfortunately, in this case, I'm afraid the prosecutor is either incompetent or worse.
And during that briefing, Cherie, President Khama himself already said that it appeared that there was feedback from some officials there in Botswana who were ridiculing the findings of this investigation report. And my question then for you is I'm wondering where to next for this case and the potential ramifications for Botswana's standing in the global economy as a country that was once stable and respected the rule of law and respected human rights and democratic processes.
Well, I still profoundly believe that Botswana hasn't gone away. And what I would hope, as I said in the press conference, is that the prosecution authorities reading the reports would say thank you for spending this money and doing the investigation, which for some reason we haven't been able to do. And using that, they would in fact go back to the court and say there is no case to answer. In addition to that, I know that the lawyers in Botswana who are handling this are extremely competent, and the judge has already given them permission, should they wish to, because of the adjournment, to bring any applications they should wish. And I'm sure that they will be considering whether they should themselves bring this matter back before the judge, but that's of course a matter for them. And in addition to that, President Khama and of course Ambassador Motsepe herself have said that they respectively are also going to take libel proceedings, defamation proceedings in relation to this. So I don't think this story is going to end today, but I think it could end well for Botswana if they acknowledge that a mistake has been made in this and right the wrong that has been done, not just to the high profile figures that we're talking about, but to the other figures that have been dragged in willy-nilly into this.
And just another issue as well, in the fact that I was in Botswana a couple of years ago, and one thing that struck me was the fact that people there are still the same as they were before. They're more interested in getting educated and basically earning money than anything else. I mean, has the authorities there given you any idea at all of exactly what they thought this money, or what form of terrorism, or where they thought this money was going to go?
Well, I think one of the tragedies of this report and the affidavit is that it doesn't really spell out a number. It doesn't spell out a lot. In fact, as I say, that it says in 2008, three separate accounts were set out, and then it follows one of them, but what happened to the other two, who knows? So there's a lot of dead ends and inconclusive trails to follow. So why this happened, really, the question is not for me. My job was just to say, how does this evidence stack up? And the answer is it doesn't stack up at all. The question of the motivation behind that is possibly would be speculation from me. It's for others to investigate, something perhaps your program would like to do.
I've seen of late President Mokhutsi is one to use his Twitter account quite actively, and I was looking at it to see if he was watching or would respond to the reports. I suppose, Chris, it is something that we'll have to follow up on at a later stage. But Cherie, I want to talk to you about what you also mentioned regarding weaponizing the legal system, and this is something that is not unique to this case alone. It's quite prevalent elsewhere in the world, where people of influence and power do use the legal system for their gain. I mean, what lessons can we draw from this in terms of how we can put an end to it? Is it the responsibility of prosecutors to make sure that they do their jobs properly? Is it the responsibility of the media also to make sure that they do their fact checking properly and not disseminate what has been proven by your report to be fake news? What would you say?
Well, you are absolutely right, and fake news is with us all the time, and we have to be very careful, don't we, about what is true and what is not. As I said in my opening remarks at the press conference, the rule of law is a very precious thing. It's a fundamental basis of societies, along with democracy, human rights. together, they all work to ensure that each and every citizen is equal before the law. And you're right, of course, sadly, in many countries, whether it's powerful business interests or powerful political interests, there's a tendency to try and manipulate the criminal law system in order to either for political or commercial gains. And that in itself undermines the confidence and the integrity of the legal system. Now, for a long time, that's been thought of, well, that's just a sort of niche issue that lawyers are interested in. But it's not just for the prosecutors, the judges, defense counsel. It is indeed for the press, who are, as part of a democratic society, a really important part of holding people to account. It's also actually in interest to each and every individual, because if you don't have an impartial legal system that treats everybody as equal before the law, and indeed innocent until proven guilty, then you are not making sure that the human rights of every citizen to live their life and do the things that you say, which is most people just want to get on with their lives, to make a better life for their children, to be educated, to make a decent living, and to have a happy life. But once you start undermining those fundamental principles of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, then it undermines everything. And it distorts the system. So the rich and powerful, the politically well-connected, get what they want at the expense of those who don't have those contacts.
I just want to point out at this stage, as we come to the end of this broadcast, we have contacted the President's office in Botswana repeatedly, Andrew Sassini in particular, and we've got no response so far. No doubt the government is going to respond, but at this stage, in terms of litigation, both Ian Khama, the former president, and Bridgette Motsepe have mentioned they're going to sue. Who are you preparing to sue then in this case?
Well, Omnia Strategy is an international law firm, as you know, based in London, and we practice international law. The suing in relation to whether it's malicious prosecution or defamation in South Africa and in Botswana will obviously be handled by local lawyers who have the rights of audience there. And we know, because we've worked very closely with President Khama's great lawyers in Botswana and with Ambassador Motsepe's excellent lawyers in South Africa, that they are all geared up and ready to go. And insofar as we as Omnia would play a part in that, it would simply be as our report would be presented as evidence. But as advocates in those cases, they're going to be very competently and excellently handled by our colleagues, it's been a pleasure to work with them.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Cherie Blair, co-founder and chair at Omnia Strategy, the lawyer who conducted this report into the so-called butterfly case in Botswana that alleges that the money has been funneled to finance so-called terrorism. Thank you very much indeed, my colleague Fifi Peters, for joining us on that conversation. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this edition of CNBC Africa, in conversation with Cherie Blair. From me, Chris Bishop, I'm Fifi Peters. It's goodbye.